Hidden deep within the rugged hills of Maharashtra, India, lies one of humanity's most astonishing artistic achievements, the Ajanta Caves. Long before the modern world, before machines or electricity, artists and monks carved these sanctuaries directly into a massive horseshoe-shaped cliff overlooking the Wagora River. They created not only temples but entire worlds of light and silence, places where faith was chiseled into stone and painted in colors that still breathe after 2,000 years. The story of Ajanta began more than 2 millennia ago, around the 2nd century BCE, during the time of the Satavahana dynasty. Buddhist monks sought remote places for meditation, away from the noise of kingdoms and the heat of the plains. The basalt cliffs near Ajanta offered both seclusion and strength. With hammers, chisels, and patience that defied imagination, they began hollowing out caves that would eventually form one of the largest monastic complexes in the ancient world. The first phase of Ajanta's creation was simple and austere. The earliest caves were viharas, monasteries used for living, studying, and meditating. Inside, you can still see rows of cells where monks once slept and the plain pillars that supported the rocky ceilings. But even in those humble chambers, the spiritual intent was powerful. Every corner of stone seemed to carry the rhythm of prayer and the calm of detachment. Centuries later, during the Gupta period, around the 5th century CE, Ajanta entered its golden age. The second phase transformed the caves into masterpieces of art and devotion. The simple stone sanctuaries of earlier monks became grand halls adorned with sculptures, paintings, and carvings that told the stories of the Buddha's previous lives, the Jataka tales. The painters of Ajanta were not merely craftsmen. They were storytellers, philosophers, and engineers of color and light. They used natural pigments, red from iron oxide, yellow from ochre, green from malachite, and blue from rare lapis lazuli. Even the binding materials were organic, animal glue, plant gum, and clay. Yet what is most extraordinary is how these paintings captured light. In the dim glow of oil lamps, the artists worked in darkness, layering pigments that shimmered under flickering flames. The walls seemed alive. Even now, when the torches of visitors illuminate the murals, faces appear to move, serene, sorrowful, divine. The subjects of these murals go far beyond religion. They show musicians, dancers, merchants, kings, and commoners, a portrait of an ancient world in motion. From the gentle curve of a hand to the glance of a painted eye, the detail is staggering. One mural, for instance, shows a bodhisattva named Padmapani, his half-closed eyes filled with compassion, his hand holding a lotus. For centuries, that single image became the face of Indian art. Ajanta was not just a temple or a monastery. It was a living school, a university of stone where monks studied philosophy, medicine, and astronomy. The caves were acoustically perfect, their vaulted ceilings designed to amplify chants in unison. When dozens of monks recited prayers inside those chambers, the sound would vibrate through the walls like a living heartbeat. And then, suddenly, it was gone. Around the 6th or 7th century CE, Ajanta was abandoned. The rise of Hindu dynasties and the decline of Buddhism led to its slow disappearance from memory. The jungle grew back. The paths vanished. Bats replaced the monks. For more than 1,000 years, the caves remained silent, sleeping under layers of dust and vines, their colors fading but never dying. The rediscovery of Ajanta was almost an accident. In 1819, a British officer named John Smith was hunting tigers in the Deccan Plateau. Pushing through dense undergrowth, he saw an opening in the rock face and stepped inside. What he found stunned him. A massive hall filled with carved pillars, a stone stupa at the center, and murals glowing faintly even in the half-light. Smith had stumbled upon one of the greatest archaeological finds in human history. He carved his name and the date on one of the pillars, an act now regretted but symbolic of the awe he felt that day. From that moment, Ajanta re-entered the world's imagination. Scholars, artists, and travelers came from across the globe to study and marvel at what the ancient monks had built. Each new excavation revealed more, 29 caves in total, each with its own story, its own rhythm of devotion and art. The balance between sculpture and painting, between silence and sound, made Ajanta unlike anything else on Earth. Today, the caves are protected as a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Yet even with modern lighting and conservation, stepping into Ajanta feels like stepping back in time. The air is cool, the silence heavy, and the faint scent of minerals and age fills the lungs. Visitors often speak of feeling watched, not by ghosts, but by the painted eyes that have stared through the centuries. Some historians argue that the painters of Ajanta knew techniques that have since been lost, methods of creating luminosity, of mixing pigments that resist decay for thousands of years. Others believe it was their spiritual devotion that preserved the art, as if the faith of the monks became part of the pigment itself. Whatever the truth, Ajanta remains a mystery not only of history, but of endurance, how something so fragile could survive so long in darkness. Even after 2,000 years, the walls still glow, the figures still breathe, and the caves, carved from solid rock by human hands, still whisper stories from a forgotten time when silence was sacred and art was a prayer. When Ajanta was rediscovered, it became more than just an archaeological marvel. It became a bridge between two distant worlds. On one side stood the modern age, curious, analytical, armed with tools of science and documentation. On the other was an ancient civilization that communicated through silence, color, and devotion. The meeting of these worlds was not always graceful. The early explorers, driven by curiosity rather than conservation, often caused more damage than they realized. The delicate surface of the murals was scratched, smoke from torches darkened the ceilings, and in some cases, water seeped in from the cliffs above, blurring the ancient pigments. Still, even in decay, Ajanta's beauty was overwhelming. Early sketches made by artists like Robert Gill and later by the Archaeological Survey of India helped preserve what was rapidly vanishing. They documented scenes of elegance and power, royal processions, heavenly beings, and the Buddha seated in meditative calm surrounded by 1,000 symbols of enlightenment. Through these paintings, the ancient world revealed itself not as primitive or simple, but as refined, emotional, and deeply human. Each cave at Ajanta was unique. Cave 1, one of the most famous, displayed some of the most refined artistry of the Gupta period. Its facade was carved with intricate reliefs of lions, elephants, and divine figures, each detail perfectly balanced. Inside, the walls told stories of moral struggle and redemption. In one scene, Prince Mahajanaka renounced his kingdom after realizing the impermanence of life. The painter captured his expression at the precise moment of realization, calm, yet filled with infinite understanding. Cave 2 stood in contrast, filled with grace and gentleness. Its paintings portrayed women of courtly beauty, adorned in jewels and silks, reflecting the elegance of the Gupta Empire at its height. The artists had mastered perspective, emotion, and balance, centuries before such ideas were codified in Western art. They used shading and light to suggest movement, the tilt of a head, the softness of a smile, the ripple of fabric in motion. The builders of Ajanta worked with astonishing precision. Carving into basalt, they planned entire structures inside out. There were no mistakes, no second chances. The halls, columns, and shrines were symmetrical, aligned with both aesthetic and acoustic perfection. They carved the ceiling first, then worked downward, ensuring that the geometry would remain flawless. What seems effortless today was in truth a feat of mathematical genius and endless patience. But Ajanta was not merely a product of craftsmanship, it was a manifestation of faith. The caves were born from the Buddhist ideal of detachment and the pursuit of enlightenment. For the monks who lived there, carving was meditation. Every strike of the chisel, every stroke of the brush, was an act of devotion. The art was never signed, for ego had no place in creation. It was not about the artist, but about awakening, a message left for all who came after. The murals told not only the life of Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha, but also the long journey of compassion across many lifetimes. They depicted stories where the Buddha, in his former incarnations, took the form of kings, beggars, animals, and saints to teach the virtues of patience, sacrifice, and mercy. The Jataka tales were more than religious parables, they were reflections of universal truths. As scholars began to translate and interpret the stories, they noticed something remarkable. The themes of Ajanta's murals echoed teachings found in distant lands, Greece, Persia, and even early Christian thought. The idea of moral struggle, renunciation, and compassion seemed to link cultures separated by oceans. Some historians believe these caves stood at the crossroads of civilizations, where trade routes carried not only goods, but ideas. The evidence of such exchange is carved into the walls. Some of the jewelry and textiles shown in the paintings resemble designs found in Central Asia. The architecture bears traces of foreign influence, yet the spirit remains unmistakably Indian. Ajanta, in its essence, was global before the world had words for such things. What is equally fascinating is how Ajanta's art influenced later generations. Centuries after its abandonment, echoes of its style appeared in the Ellora caves, in Tibetan monasteries, and even in Southeast Asian temples. The soft contours of faces, the delicate positioning of hands, the calm gaze of enlightenment, all carried Ajanta's fingerprint. It was not just a site of worship, it was a seed from which much of Asia's spiritual art would grow. By the late 19th and early 20th centuries, Ajanta had become a source of national pride for India's emerging scholars and artists. Figures like Nandalal Bose and Abanindranath Tagore, pioneers of the Bengal school of art, drew inspiration from the caves. They saw in Ajanta a distinctly Indian aesthetic, one that could stand beside the greatest works of Greece or Renaissance Europe. But even as Ajanta's fame spread, its fragility became clear. The paintings, exposed to moisture and air for the first time in centuries, began to deteriorate rapidly. Fungi grew on the damp walls. Tourists and photographers left scratches and footprints. Efforts were made to preserve what remained: new drainage systems, limited access, and careful restoration by experts who spent decades studying every pigment and fracture. Despite all this, Ajanta's spirit endured. Walking through the caves today, one can still feel the same sense of awe that must have overwhelmed John Smith in 1819. The air seems to hum faintly, as though the sound of ancient chants still lingers between the walls. To stand before the murals is to witness time paused. The colors, though faded, retain warmth. The figures, though chipped, still breathe. The dim light reveals brushstrokes so delicate that they seem almost human. No photograph or replica captures this intimacy. It must be experienced, felt, absorbed. Ajanta is often described as an art gallery of the gods, but it is also a mirror, reflecting humanity's need to create, to believe, to leave behind something that defies death. It is proof that art can be both mortal and eternal, carved from stone, yet alive in spirit. In the quiet halls of Ajanta, every surface told a story, and every symbol carried a meaning far deeper than what met the eye. To the untrained observer, the murals might have seemed like scenes from daily life or vivid illustrations of Buddhist mythology. But to those who understood the ancient language of symbols, the caves were a coded scripture, a vast spiritual library written in color and light. The artists of Ajanta worked with a vocabulary of gestures and postures that spoke of divine truth. A hand raised with the palm outward was not just a gesture, it was the Abhaya Mudra, the sign of reassurance and protection. The crossed ankles of a seated Buddha signified meditation. The half-closed eyes represented the balance between the physical and spiritual worlds. To them, every curve, every expression was intentional, a spiritual geometry meant to guide the viewer's thoughts toward enlightenment. Even the layout of the caves followed a sacred pattern. The main shrines, called Chaitya halls, were aligned to the natural arc of the cliff, allowing the sunlight to fall gently through the entrances at specific times of day. The builders understood the movement of the sun and carved accordingly. Morning light entered some caves like a slow river, illuminating the face of the central Buddha before receding into shadow. It was a form of worship not through ritual, but through architecture, a cosmic design that made time itself a participant in devotion. The ceilings of many caves were adorned with intricate patterns: mandalas, lotus flowers, vines, and celestial figures. These were not mere decorations. Each pattern represented the order of the universe, the cycle of birth and rebirth, the endless continuity of life. When monks lay beneath these painted skies in meditation, they looked upward, not at stone, but at eternity. The pigments used in the murals were drawn entirely from nature. The reds came from hematite and cinnabar, the yellows from ochre and orpiment, blues from crushed lapis lazuli, imported at great cost from Afghanistan. The painters mixed these minerals with water and organic binders to create hues that could endure centuries of neglect. Modern chemists have examined these pigments and still marvel at their stability. Despite exposure to air and moisture, the colors have not lost their essence, a feat that remains difficult even with today's technology. One of the most striking qualities of the Ajanta paintings was their realism. The artists understood anatomy, proportion, and movement with astonishing clarity. Figures were drawn with a sense of weight and grace that predated similar techniques in Western art by a millennium. Scholars have long debated how they achieved such mastery without models or perspective grids. Some suggest that the painters used thread or simple geometry to maintain proportions. Others believe their skill came from centuries of apprenticeship and oral tradition, a lineage of technique passed from master to pupil, now lost to time. Beyond artistry, the caves concealed layers of symbolism that touched the deepest aspects of Buddhist philosophy. In one mural, the Buddha is depicted surrounded by disciples, with his hand raised in teaching. The scene, though simple, is framed by vines, animals, and celestial beings, a reminder that all life participates in the cycle of learning. In another, the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara extends his hand toward the suffering, embodying compassion not as an idea, but as a living force that connects worlds. The artists of Ajanta also possessed an uncanny understanding of emotion. The faces in the murals were not static. They expressed serenity, longing, joy, sorrow, the full range of human feeling. One could almost sense that the painters were reaching beyond devotion, trying to capture something universal. It is said that when early visitors entered the caves with lanterns, the flickering light made the painted eyes seem alive, following them through the darkness. Some fainted, others wept. For a moment, it was as if the boundary between the living and the eternal had dissolved. Despite the clarity of their vision, much of Ajanta's technique remained shrouded in mystery. The walls were coated with layers of clay, lime, and cow dung to form a smooth surface. On this, the painters drew outlines in red ochre, then filled them with colors while the surface was still damp. This was neither true fresco nor tempera, but a hybrid method unknown elsewhere. Some scholars argue that the painters mixed the pigments with palm juice or egg white to increase adhesion. Others insist the technique was unique to the Deccan Plateau, developed through centuries of trial and error. One of the greatest enigmas of Ajanta lies in the preservation of its paintings. For nearly 1,000 years, the caves were open to rain, humidity, and darkness. Yet when rediscovered, the murals still glowed with life. How did they survive so long in such conditions? Some believe the unique mineral composition of the basalt rock helped stabilize the pigments. Others claim that the combination of natural airflow and the monks' careful maintenance preserved the environment. A few even whisper that the art was protected by the same spiritual energy that created it, a notion dismissed by science but quietly respected by many who have stood within those chambers. The sound of Ajanta was another mystery. Though silent now, the caves were built to resonate. A single chant could echo for several seconds, creating a vibration that filled the space. The monks understood the physics of sound as deeply as the painters understood color. In the great Chaitya halls, the stone stupas acted as amplifiers, sending waves of resonance through the air. To chant inside Ajanta was to feel the universe hum in harmony with the voice. As the 20th century advanced, modern conservationists began to realize that the very act of visiting the caves was endangering them. The carbon dioxide from human breath, the flash of cameras, and even the warmth of bodies caused deterioration. New restrictions were placed: no flash photography, limited entry, and strict climate control. Yet the question remained: could such living art be preserved without losing its soul? Many replicas have been made in museums, universities, and digital archives, but none capture the feeling of standing inside Ajanta itself. There is something alive in the silence there. The air feels charged, as if 1,000 prayers still linger, absorbed into the stone. Every echo, every brushstroke, is a fragment of a forgotten world that somehow refuses to die. Even now, researchers continue to find hidden details, faded inscriptions, unfinished carvings, outlines beneath the paint that reveal changes made during creation. It is as though Ajanta still holds secrets it is not yet ready to reveal. And perhaps that is fitting. For in a world obsessed with discovery, Ajanta remains a reminder that some mysteries are meant to endure. When Lieutenant John Smith stumbled upon the entrance of Cave 10 in 1819, he could not have imagined what he had awakened. At first glance, he thought he had discovered the ruins of a forgotten fort or palace. The cliffside was overgrown, the air thick with vines and dust, the river below barely visible through the jungle canopy. But as he stepped inside, the beam of his torch illuminated columns and statues, intricate and deliberate, as though waiting for light to return after centuries of sleep. Smith, like most European explorers of his time, was trained to measure the world in terms of empire and conquest. Yet in Ajanta, he encountered something beyond comprehension, an art that spoke in silence, older and more refined than anything he had ever seen. He scratched his name and the date, April 1819, onto a pillar, an act both careless and historical. That single mark would become a reminder of the day Ajanta re-entered the story of humanity. News of the discovery spread quickly through colonial circles. The British East India Company commissioned surveys and drawings, eager to understand what lay within those cliffs. One of the earliest and most important figures in this effort was Major Robert Gill, a soldier and painter who devoted more than 20 years of his life to documenting Ajanta's murals. Armed with candles, pigments, and immense patience, he painstakingly reproduced the paintings on large canvases, often working in near darkness. Gill's reproductions were later sent to England and exhibited in London. For many in the West, these paintings were their first encounter with the depth and sophistication of Indian civilization. Audiences who had long considered Asia mysterious or primitive were suddenly confronted with a vision of art and spirituality that rivaled the frescoes of Rome or the cathedrals of Florence. But fate was unkind. In 1866, a fire at the Crystal Palace in London destroyed nearly all of Gill's original reproductions. Only a few sketches survived. The loss was immeasurable, not just for art, but for understanding a moment in history when two worlds had briefly met through color and devotion. The rediscovery of Ajanta coincided with a growing global curiosity about ancient cultures. Archaeologists, linguists, and art historians began to piece together India's lost past, from the Indus Valley to the Mauryan Empire, from Ashoka's inscriptions to the caves of Ellora. Yet Ajanta stood apart. It was not merely a ruin, but a revelation, an unbroken chain between faith and craftsmanship, untouched by war or conquest. The 19th and early 20th centuries saw a surge of scholars visiting Ajanta. Among them was James Ferguson, the pioneering historian of Indian architecture, who declared the caves the most magnificent series of Buddhist monuments in existence. Artists like William Simpson and later Indian scholars such as Ghulam Yazdani worked tirelessly to document and preserve what remained. Each new discovery, a faded mural, a buried inscription, a hidden alcove, deepened the sense that Ajanta was not just an artistic wonder, but a window into the ancient mind. During India's struggle for independence, Ajanta took on a symbolic meaning. It became proof that the subcontinent's culture and intellect were not products of colonial enlightenment, but had flourished long before. Figures like Ananda Coomaraswamy and Rabindranath Tagore championed Ajanta as a reminder of India's spiritual and aesthetic depth. Tagore wrote that, "The murals of Ajanta whisper to the soul of India, saying, 'You were great once, and you shall be great again.'" In those years, Indian artists began to draw inspiration from Ajanta's timeless grace. The Bengal school of art, led by Abanindranath Tagore and Nandalal Bose, sought to revive classical Indian aesthetics in a modern form. They rejected the rigid realism of European painting, instead embracing the fluid lines, muted tones, and emotional subtlety of Ajanta's murals. Through them, the caves lived again, their influence spreading into classrooms, exhibitions, and even the independence movement itself. As more scholars studied the site, new revelations emerged about its creation. The caves were not built all at once, but over centuries, evolving alongside the development of Buddhism itself. The early Hinayana phase emphasized simplicity, symbols rather than images of the Buddha. The later Mahayana phase introduced human depictions, elaborate ornamentation, and celestial beings. Ajanta became a visual timeline of spiritual evolution, carved into stone. Yet, amid all this admiration, there was also tragedy. By the mid-20th century, the very act of rediscovery had begun to endanger the caves. Artificial lighting, introduced for visitors, caused chemical reactions in the pigments. Moisture from human breath and the heat from lamps encouraged fungal growth. Some paintings began to flake, others to fade entirely. The once living colors dulled. Conservation efforts followed, cautious, deliberate, and controversial. Scientists from India and abroad experimented with chemical treatments, ventilation systems, and restricted entry. The Archaeological Survey of India undertook massive restoration projects, photographing and cataloging every detail. The aim was no longer to uncover Ajanta, but to protect it, to ensure it would not vanish a second time. In 1983, Ajanta was declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site. The global community recognized its value not just as an artifact of faith, but as a masterpiece of human creativity. The site became a pilgrimage not only for Buddhists, but for artists, historians, and travelers, seeking a glimpse of a civilization that once understood how to merge spirit with stone. Yet even as visitors from across the world arrived to marvel at the caves, Ajanta remained strangely untouched by time. The air still felt heavy with reverence. The silence between chants and footsteps seemed almost sacred. Guides whispered stories, their voices echoing softly through the pillars, as if afraid to disturb the sleeping spirits of the monks who had once lived there. Today, digital technology has given Ajanta a second life. High-resolution scans and 3D models allow people to explore the caves virtually, preserving details invisible to the naked eye. Artificial lighting has been replaced by soft, filtered illumination that mimics the glow of ancient lamps. Even so, the experience of standing before the murals, breathing in the cool air, watching the light slide across the Buddha's face, cannot be replicated. In the end, Ajanta's rediscovery was not a single event, but a rebirth that continues even now. Each generation finds new meaning in its silence. For the monks who built it, Ajanta was a path to enlightenment. For the explorers who found it, a window into an unknown world. And for us today, it remains a mirror, reflecting both the fragility and brilliance of human creation. For all its beauty and precision, Ajanta remained incomplete, a masterpiece interrupted. Many of its caves, though planned with mathematical perfection, were left unfinished. Rough walls, half-carved columns, and abandoned tools still lie in the shadows, as though the craftsman simply vanished mid-stroke. To this day, no one knows why. Some historians believe the site's sudden abandonment around the 6th century was due to the decline of Buddhism in India. As royal patronage shifted toward Hindu dynasties like the Chalukyas and later the Rashtrakutas, the flow of resources that sustained these monumental projects dried up. Others suspect more immediate causes: floods, disease, or political upheaval. The cliffs that once echoed with chants of monks fell silent and the forest began its slow reclamation. Yet the caves themselves seem to resist the notion of decay. Even unfinished, they radiate purpose. Cave 15, for instance, appears incomplete but reveals faint outlines of a stupa and Buddha statue that suggest a work halted in mid-conception. Cave 26, by contrast, stands as one of the most complex and complete monuments, a grand Chaitya hall with a colossal seated Buddha carved from living rock, framed by celestial beings and swirling halos of light. It is said that when the first rays of dawn strike the figure's face, the stone seems to glow from within. But beyond these masterpieces lies another Ajanta, a darker, lesser-known network of recesses and unfinished chambers that were seldom entered even by explorers. Some contain no inscriptions, no carvings, just the faint beginnings of architecture. These have given rise to countless theories. Were they monastic cells intended for expansion, secret meditation chambers, or perhaps storage areas for relics never recovered? In 1928, during one of the early restoration efforts, workers stumbled upon a narrow corridor behind Cave 12. It appeared to have been sealed deliberately. Inside, they found nothing, only stone dust and silence. But the walls bore faint marks of chisels, suggesting the chamber had been in progress when work stopped. The mystery deepened when further analysis revealed that this sealed passage aligned perfectly with a similar unfinished groove in Cave 13, as if a hidden connection between the two had been planned but never completed. Over the years, such anomalies have fascinated both archaeologists and spiritual seekers. Some monks from nearby monasteries claim that deeper beneath the cliff there exist collapsed passages and forgotten sanctuaries, part of a grander complex now lost to time. While no physical evidence supports this, ground-penetrating surveys have shown irregularities beneath certain caves, hinting that more may still lie hidden within the basalt. Legends among locals speak of treasures sealed inside these walls, not of gold or jewels, but of scrolls and manuscripts. They say that before Ajanta was abandoned, monks concealed sacred texts within the stone, fearing invasion or desecration. No such relics have ever been found, but the story persists, whispered by guides and villagers alike. The physical challenges of constructing Ajanta only add to the enigma. The caves were carved not into soft limestone, but into hard volcanic basalt. Without explosives, without iron drills, the ancient craftsmen used hammers and chisels, working from top to bottom, hollowing entire halls by hand. The precision of their alignment, the symmetry between pillars, the perfect curvature of domes, defies belief. How they achieved such mathematical consistency without modern tools remains one of Ajanta's enduring mysteries. Modern researchers have attempted to reconstruct their techniques. They found that the artisans likely worked in teams, using wooden scaffolds suspended along the cliff face. The initial outline was drawn directly onto the rock, and rough excavation began from the ceiling downward, ensuring no debris would destroy the finished sections below. Once the rough structure was shaped, finer carving began, sometimes taking decades. Finally, painters followed, applying layers of plaster and pigment in darkness lit only by flickering oil lamps. This interplay between stone and light was deliberate. The builders designed each cave to manipulate illumination. In some halls, shafts of sunlight enter through the doorway at precise angles, lighting the Buddha's face or altar for only a few moments each day, often coinciding with solstices or seasonal transitions. It was a way to measure time, not through calendars, but through sacred alignment. Some researchers even believe Ajanta's layout follows a spiritual geometry, a mandala spread across the cliff face. When plotted from above, the positioning of the major caves mirrors cosmic diagrams found in early Buddhist texts. The sequence of chaitya halls and viharas appears not random, but arranged to symbolize the path to enlightenment, from simplicity and learning in the early caves to transcendence in the later ones. Yet, beyond all scholarly theories, there remains something ineffable about Ajanta, an atmosphere that resists explanation. Many visitors describe an uncanny sense of presence within the caves. The acoustics seem to carry whispers, the shadows appear to move with intent. Some attribute it to the play of light, others to the lingering energy of centuries of meditation. During restoration work in the 1950s, a group of archaeologists reported hearing rhythmic sounds at night, faint, repetitive, echoing through the empty chambers. They assumed it was dripping water, but the pattern was too steady, almost like chanting. When they investigated, the sound ceased. The phenomenon was never recorded, but local workers insisted they had heard it too. "The monks still pray," one said quietly. "Only the living cannot hear them clearly." Ajanta's mysteries extend to its art as well. Certain motifs appear only once, without explanation. A blue-skinned bodhisattva unlike any other, a foreign figure wearing Greco-Roman attire, animals that do not belong to India's ecosystem. Were these symbols of trade and cultural exchange, or imaginative depictions of spiritual realms? Scholars remain divided. The caves also challenge assumptions about ancient technology. Some of the ceiling patterns, when analyzed under modern light, reveal near-perfect geometric repetition, impossible to achieve freehand. The symmetry between motifs in different caves suggests the use of templates or projection methods centuries before such tools were known. And then there are the pigments themselves. Tests have shown that some blues and greens retain a luminescent quality, glowing faintly under certain wavelengths. Whether this was intentional or accidental is unknown, but it lends credence to the theory that the monks understood more about chemistry and light than history credits them for. What is certain is that Ajanta was far more than an isolated monastery. It was a living organism, a fusion of science, art, mathematics, and faith. To walk its corridors was to move through layers of meaning, each turn revealing not just beauty but philosophy, not just devotion but mastery. And even now, centuries after the last chisel fell silent, Ajanta continues to provoke awe and humility in equal measure. It stands as proof that some creations transcend their makers, that faith, when carved into stone, can outlive empires, languages, and even memory itself. Long after its monks had gone and its chants had faded into the stone, Ajanta's influence continued to echo through centuries. The ideas carved into those basalt walls did not end with their abandonment. They migrated across kingdoms, across mountains, across time. From India's Deccan Plateau to the deserts of Afghanistan and the steppes of China, the visual language born in Ajanta carried the essence of an entire civilization's spirituality. When scholars trace the path of Buddhist art through Asia, they find Ajanta's fingerprints everywhere. In the frescoes of Bagh and the rock-cut monasteries of Ellora, the same graceful curves, the same serene eyes, reappear like a signature. Even in the far reaches of Dunhuang's Mogao Caves in western China, painted centuries later, One can see echoes of Ajanta's fluid lines and radiant halos. The art had evolved, but its soul was unmistakably Indian, the same synthesis of devotion and discipline that once thrived on that horseshoe-shaped cliff above the Wagora River. Ajanta's gift to the world was not only its art, but its philosophy of creation. It taught that beauty and faith could coexist without contradiction, that art could be prayer, and prayer could be architecture. The sculptors did not merely decorate stone, they sanctified it. This idea would later influence the temples of South India, the stupas of Sri Lanka, and the pagodas of East Asia. Wherever Buddhism traveled, it carried with it the memory of Ajanta's serenity. When India entered the modern age, the caves found new meaning. During the early 20th century, as nationalism began to awaken, Ajanta became a symbol of continuity, proof that India's genius had once reached sublime heights and could do so again. Students from the newly founded art schools of Calcutta, Madras, and Bombay journeyed to the caves to study their proportions, pigments, and postures. They sketched by candlelight, sleeping on the cold stone floors where monks once meditated. Among them was Nandalal Bose, who later recalled that Ajanta taught me to listen to silence. To him and many others, the caves were not ruins. They were living teachers. Even outside India, Ajanta stirred imagination. The British archaeologist Lawrence Waddell called it a cathedral of quiet intellect. Art historians compared its achievements to the Renaissance, though Ajanta had flourished a millennium earlier. Japanese scholars such as Okakura Kakuzo visited in the 1910s and described the site as the origin point of Asian aesthetic consciousness. For them, Ajanta represented a shared cultural ancestry, a reminder that Asia's artistic dialogue had begun long before Western influence arrived. Yet the true miracle of Ajanta was not its influence on art, but its endurance through oblivion. For more than 1,000 years, monsoon rains lashed its facade, roots split its stones, and silence reigned where once chants had filled the air. Still the pigments clung to the walls, defiant. The faces of bodhisattvas remained luminous. Even time itself seemed reluctant to erase them. Modern conservationists faced a challenge unlike any other: how to preserve not just images, but atmosphere. Artificial lighting risked bleaching colors, chemicals damaged the plaster, even breath altered the humidity. Eventually, scientists devised a delicate equilibrium. Air conditioning systems regulate temperature, filtered lights imitate the glow of ancient oil lamps. Entry is limited, silence encouraged. In that fragile balance between exposure and protection, Ajanta continues to live. Beyond preservation, new technology has opened ways to rediscover what the naked eye can no longer see. High-resolution scans have revealed underdrawings beneath the visible paint, ghost lines where artists changed their minds centuries ago. Infrared imaging shows pigments invisible in normal light. 3D mapping of the cliffs exposes hidden chambers and microcracks, offering clues about how the builders engineered stability. Each discovery feels less like research and more like conversation across millennia. Still, the question remains: why does Ajanta move those who visit it so profoundly? Perhaps because it reminds us of the unity between intellect and faith, between labor and vision. The same hand that carved a perfect column also painted the tender curve of a mother's face. The same monk who meditated in silence helped design the acoustics of a hall so that his voice would echo like thunder. Ajanta was proof that art could be both precise and transcendent, that reason and reverence need not be opposites. For modern India, Ajanta became a mirror of identity. After centuries of colonization, when the country sought to reclaim its narrative, Ajanta stood as evidence that its civilization had mastered science, geometry, and aesthetics long before industrial modernity. It was not merely heritage, it was testament. When UNESCO inscribed the site in 1983, the world acknowledged what India had always known, that these caves were not relics, but revelations. Even today, pilgrims and tourists alike describe a similar sensation on entering the main Chaitya Hall. The air changes, sounds soften, light becomes a living thing. The Buddha sits motionless, carved from the same rock as the mountain, yet seems to breathe. For a moment, centuries dissolve. One feels what those monks must have felt, a nearness to something infinite. And when one steps back into daylight, the world outside feels louder, smaller, almost unreal. Ajanta's endurance carries a lesson for the modern age too. In a world obsessed with speed and consumption, it stands for patience, for the quiet dignity of craftsmanship. The builders worked for decades on a single figure, knowing they might never see it finished. Their faith was not in completion, but in creation itself. The rhythm of hammer and chisel became a form of meditation, a dialogue between human effort and divine aspiration. Perhaps that is why Ajanta refuses to fade. It was built not for fame or conquest, but for contemplation. Every brushstroke, every carving, was an act of devotion to truth itself. In an age where empires rose and fell, these monks sought permanence not in power, but in understanding. And in that pursuit, they achieved something no empire ever did: immortality of meaning. Today, as drones capture its cliffs from above and digital archives preserve every pixel of its murals, Ajanta speaks to a different generation. It reminds us that technology too can serve wonder if guided by reverence. That preservation is not just about stone, but about spirit. The goal is not to keep Ajanta untouched, but to keep its message alive. That illumination, both literal and spiritual, comes from within. The story of Ajanta is ultimately the story of human resilience, the will to create beauty in darkness, to carve eternity from impermanence. Long before it was rediscovered, before cameras and tourists, it had already fulfilled its purpose. For those who once knelt before its painted walls, it was enough to know that truth could take form in color, that silence could speak through stone. And though centuries have passed, the caves still whisper that same message: light, once carved, never truly dies. In the quiet hours of dawn, when the jungle mist still clings to the basalt cliffs, Ajanta feels less like a monument and more like a memory that the earth itself refuses to forget. The Wagora River winds below like a silver thread, unchanged for millennia, whispering to the stones that line its banks. Above it, the caves remain, unmoving, unbroken, alive in their silence. For centuries, they have stood watch over the passing of empires. The Satavahanas, who commissioned the first carvings, are gone. The Vakatakas, who expanded them, are dust. The Mughal banners came and vanished. The British flags rose and fell, and yet Ajanta endures. It does not bow to history. It outlives it. To step inside is to walk backward through time. The air thickens, sound recedes, and the light grows tender. One forgets the world of noise and screens, of seconds and schedules. Here the heartbeat slows. Every painted face, every carved fold of cloth, feels as though it remembers something we have forgotten: the patience to create for eternity rather than applause. In that stillness lies Ajanta's truest power. It reminds us that civilization is not built on conquest but contemplation. The monks who once shaped these stones sought no wealth, no legacy. They worked for illumination, the kind that cannot be measured in gold or fame. To them, enlightenment was not a destination, but an act, the slow chiseling away of ignorance, stroke by stroke, until only truth remained. In a world now obsessed with speed, Ajanta offers a lesson in slowness. Each brushstroke in its murals took days to mix, hours to apply, and centuries to survive. Its builders carved entire halls from a single block of mountain without machines, guided only by rhythm and faith. Today, surrounded by algorithms and automation, their devotion feels almost alien, and yet deeply human. Art historians call Ajanta a masterpiece of human creative genius. But it is more than that. It is evidence that beauty and wisdom can coexist without compromise, that art need not serve power to have purpose. Its existence is a counter-argument to cynicism, a testament to what humanity can achieve when guided by reverence instead of ambition. Modern pilgrims who arrive at Ajanta rarely come seeking religion. They come seeking perspective. They come because in the hush of those stone corridors, time finally listens. They come because, for a fleeting moment, the noise of the modern world fades, replaced by the quiet certainty that we too are capable of creation that lasts. Outside, the forest continues its eternal rhythm, cicadas calling, leaves rustling, the river murmuring below. Inside, the Buddha still sits unmoved, eyes half closed, lips curved in a faint smile that seems to know something we do not. Perhaps he smiles because he understands that all things pass, and yet some echoes never fade. For Ajanta is not just a relic of faith, it is faith itself. Faith in effort, in vision, in the endurance of the human spirit. Every generation that has rediscovered it has done so in times of change or uncertainty. When the British found it, they were questioning the limits of their empire. When Indian artists reclaimed it, they were defining a nation's soul. And now, as technology rewires the world faster than we can comprehend, Ajanta stands once again as a reminder. Permanence is possible, but only through purpose. Perhaps that is why it feels alive even in ruin. The cracks on the walls, the faded pigments, the missing hands of statues. All these imperfections tell the truth that no restoration can erase, that beauty and decay are not enemies but partners. Without the passing of time, there would be no wonder in what survives. As the sun rises higher, light pours through the entrance of Cave 26. It strikes the face of the seated Buddha, bathing it in gold. The shadows retreat, and for a brief moment, the stone seems to breathe again. It is easy to imagine the monks, long vanished, kneeling in the same glow centuries ago, whispering the same prayers. Time folds upon itself, and the past becomes present. When visitors leave Ajanta, they carry something invisible with them. It is not knowledge nor belief, but an echo, a soft reminder that within every human being lies the same spark that once drove these artisans to carve divinity into stone. Whether we build cities or write stories, whether we shape code or music or dreams, that same impulse endures, to create something that will outlive us. In that sense, Ajanta is not finished. Every person who gazes at its murals, who feels the weight of its silence, continues the work begun 2,000 years ago. The caves are not monuments. They are conversations, carried across centuries by the persistence of wonder. One day, perhaps, the jungle will reclaim them entirely. The vines will creep over the doorways, the colors will fade into the stone, and the river will sing alone again. But even then, Ajanta will not be gone. It will live in every act of patience, in every hand that dares to make beauty without expectation. Because Ajanta was never about temples or idols. It was about light, how it enters darkness, how it reveals truth, and how it endures long after the source is gone. And as long as light exists, so too will the spirit of Ajanta.